1-point perspective. So in 1-point perspective, we have a horizon. So the horizon is also referred to as the eye level, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It's the height of your eyes in relationship to the space that you're in. Now, when we start drawing in what we refer to as drawing in perspective, we're going to use boxes to illustrate that. But it applies to everything. It doesn't just apply to boxes, but boxes are useful. So in 1-point perspective, the things to think about to get started are, when you're getting started with it, the box that we're drawing, and we're drawing it out of our heads, we're not drawing this from life. The box that we're making up, because we're learning how to do this in theory first. 1-point perspective is where the front plane of the box faces you. Neither one of the corners are really closer than the other. If one of the corners is closer, it's probably a 2-point perspective problem, which we'll get to later. But if we establish the front of the box, then the lines that make up the top of the box, that move away from us in space, these two lines are parallel. They converge at the horizon at this point here, which we call a vanishing point. And for 1-point perspective, if you're working from life, it's directly in front of you. But if you're just making it up, for the purposes of drawing, it can be anywhere on this line. But when we're getting started here, it's a good idea to just have it in the middle. So we went and we made the front plane, we drew our lines back to the vanishing point, and then we cut it off wherever we want. And that gives us a fairly simple box that looks like it's sitting on this ground plane that goes back to the horizon. Now, the horizon is, again, it's where your eyes are. It's not where your eyes are looking. A lot of the time, if you're drawing a still life or something, people will say that, like, let's say you're looking at a setup on the floor, and where the floor meets the wall, there's a line. In that scenario, your eye level is not even on the page. It's way up where your eyes are. And that line where the floor meets the wall is not a horizon, it's just a line. So a lot of you guys are going to think that way, and I've seen people that have been drawing for years make that mistake, so I want to make sure we stop it early. So if you have a 1-point perspective problem and you have multiple boxes and their lines are parallel, they're going to share the same point. So just give me a second to draw this in. And when it comes to 1-point perspective, the further away from the vanishing point to the left and to the right you get, the more distorted things get. But if you were to try to draw like a chessboard or something like that, all the lines going back need to be going to the same point. So you're, depending on how close to it you are, you're going to get some distortion. But so far, so good on this one. Now I'm using charcoal. I'm using a charcoal pencil here. And the reason is that charcoal makes a nice dark mark, and we're going to be able to see it. And when you guys are doing assignments in this class, I'm going to ask you to use charcoal, because when you turn it in, If it's in graphite, it really doesn't photograph well, and I won't be able to see a lot of what you've done. So make sure that you're using these charcoal pencils, at least for this kind of a problem. So in order to practice this, this is how I want you to start. So you have your horizon. You can start with a box right below, and then you can throw some other boxes on there. I usually tell people to do 3 below the horizon, 3 above the horizon, and then 1 or 2 on the horizon. The rules for above the horizon are the same as they are below it. They're just reversed. But really, for 1-point perspective, all you need to know is that all the lines moving away from you go to the same point. So you don't even have to really think about it. Just make that happen. And I notice that that's a little... My angles aren't exactly perfect. Try and fix them. Now, if you're going on the horizon, you do the same thing, and it's even simpler. Now, something else I want to point out is that these lines that go back in space, notice how I'm drawing them all the way to the point every time. That's a habit that I want you guys to get into, because if you get in the habit of drawing them out all the time, it'll show you relationships that when things get really complicated later on, you're going to need to be able to see things all the way out. When things get complicated, you're going to need to be able to simplify things. And having your lines all the way out is one of those ways you can do it. It's a really good habit to get into. And the last thing I want to show you on this is, if you're nailing this and you're still looking for a way to sort of complicate these drawings and work on them a little bit more, the next step is to draw these boxes transparently. So the way that you do that is, we'll go back to the first one because it's nice and big. So we have the front, we have the top. We can only see 2 planes, but we know that the box has 6 sides. So what you do is you go from these corners back to your vanishing point, and feel free to use a ruler here if you feel like that helps you. Sometimes I feel like I need to use a ruler. But my lines are fairly straight. Now, we drew from the front corners back, and now, if we draw this straight down, and this straight down, they should hit this line in the same place, if we did it right. And we should also, and this is a way to check what you've done, strengthen those lines in front so everybody can see it a little bit better. The visible lines, it's always a good idea to make them a little bit darker. And you can see how that played out fairly well. and another thing, one of the ways that you'll know that you got the transparent thing right is that we know that the top plane and the bottom plane are the same size shape, but as you move further down from the horizon, the same size plane is going to get bigger, just like this one to this one. Here we don't even see it, but the bottom plane is going to be taller than the top plane here. And that's going to be the same all the way through the drawing. So if you get to a place where you're nailing this down, but you still want to practice 1-point perspective, go ahead and try and make each one of them transparent. That's a good exercise. And then we'll pick up 2-point perspective in a minute. Two-point perspective. So when you're starting with 2-point perspective, instead of drawing the front plane of the box, you start with the front corner, and it's whichever corner is the closest to you. And like it sounds like, there's 2 vanishing points instead of 1. One of them is going to be, usually one of them is a little bit closer, the other one a little bit further away. Normally they're going to be off of your page in a practical sense. One of the mistakes people make is that they let their vanishing points, they let them get a little bit too close together. And having vanishing points that are close together causes distortion. So we don't want that. So I have one vanishing point here going off the page. And remember to always draw these lines all the way back. And it's worth it to spend time on them even though they're not really part of the drawing. And these 2 lines need to reasonably converge on that horizon going off the page there. The other side. Same thing. I'm using a bigger piece of paper this time, so my lines are wobbling a little more. I'm covering a lot more distance. I'm also having to stand out of the way of the camera. So we'll see how this plays out. All right, so we have the front planes worked out. Now we have to work out the top. All you do is go from this corner to that vanishing point and from that corner to that vanishing point. So, and use these lines to tell you how to get there. That's one of the reasons why we drew them out in the first place. Make sure that they're all converging at what looks like the same rate. All right, so that box looks pretty good. Now, one of the other things that you'll notice about 2-point perspective is let's say we took like a whole bunch of blocks and dumped them out on the table and just let them roll randomly around. The vast majority of them are going to land in 2-point perspective to you and your point of view. There might be a 1-point perspective box in the pile, but mostly they'll be 2-point. And so that means that they're probably not landing all lined up. They're not going to share their points if they're just drawn out on the ground here. So let me do another one that has different points. This one will have a point that's a little bit closer. Yeah, I'm making kind of a mess here, but that's okay. A big part of drawing is making a mess and then taking the time to clean it up. And if you can clean it up right, you can end up making pretty good drawings. So if this vanishing point is close, it means that this one needs to be considerably further away. So that looks like a pretty good angle. And I'll let that go. Back to the other vanishing point over here. And having these original lines really helps us with that third one. And we can cut this off. And this is going to be kind of skinny. But these lines here need to converge. And if they converge on this longer scale, there's a better chance of them converging at that smaller scale. So again, this is a little bit messy, but it's the kind of thing we can clean up. All right, so those two, they sit nicely in the same plane, but they don't share the same points. See how they just sit in the plane? And that's the idea. So these can be cleaned up quite a lot. We can erase all the stuff that we don't need. But these are the basics of two-point perspective. There's a lot more to it once we get going. But this is the stuff that you want to practice. And remember, if you want to, let's see, this needs to be a little bit higher. One of the things you can do is take the height of that front corner and make sure that it's longer or taller than the back corner. That way we know that we're actually converging. This looked a little too parallel to me. And remember, these lines are supposed to be parallel in real life, but because we're looking at them at an angle, they're converging on that horizon. Now, everything above the horizon works the same way, just upside down. See? I need to take that angle down a little bit. They're almost the same. So I will have it start here in the same place. It just knocks that down a little bit. And that's going to be better. And remember, if you want to make these transparent, it's the same as in one-point perspective. You just draw the inside lines back to the vanishing point. And we use this angle, and this angle. We just make sure that we're going in between them. We can draw it all the way out. We probably should, but same thing here. Draw that out. and it runs into this line. And now if it's right, when we go down from this back corner, it should run into that intersection, and it does. So on some level, this box is right. Now, if you want to sort of play around with these a little bit, there's different things that you can do if you want to, like let's say you want to start turning this into a house with a roof. We do the X to find the center of the plane, because remember, this is all about planes. And notice when we cut it in half, the front half of the plane is bigger than the back half. That gives us a sense of dimension. So now we just come up from the center as high as we want. And let's say it's about there. Take that angle. Take that angle. Now from here, we go back to the vanishing point, the same vanishing point as the other ones. Just make sure it's reasonable. And now from here, if we extended this out, these are two lines that are not going to converge on the horizon because they're not parallel to the ground plane. So we just need to make sure that they converge a tiny bit. So something like that. Yep, it's going to be okay. And now we have a little box with a roof. So the idea for the rest of the video is just for me to sort of play with the mechanics of two-point perspective so you guys can see what that looks like. And I'm going to do some things that are a little bit more advanced, but they're all things that we're going to get to. But the thing I wanted to reinforce that I don't think I talked about quite enough is the idea that these lines that go back in space, they converge as they go back, but what they're doing is they're converging on the horizon at a specific point. And when you're drawing, if you can just draw in a way that's consistent, it's going to translate into something convincing. And what that sort of turns into is that you don't even really have to do things right for them to be convincing. So keep that in mind. It's better to be consistent than it is to be right when it comes to this kind of stuff. So this little section here, you notice that the box I drew, it stops at the horizon. And the idea is there that the top of the box is at the horizon. And then the bottom of it we're looking down at. So I was just going to try and have some fun with building this sort of skyscraper that is as tall as our eye level. And then I would cut it in half and show you these little planes, and I cut it in half again just to show you how as the cuts move down, you see more of the top of each one of the boxes. And it's an important idea in perspective. And if you remember the ellipse video, I showed you that with a little plate. But drawing it's a different story, so that's what's going on here. And there's a little section at the end of this video that gets cut off, and it was kind of a cool little idea, and you'll see it. I won't have much time to explain it when it happens, but we'll talk about it when it does. In this little section, I'm drawing an ellipse inside that plane, and there's a little bit of a mistake here. The plane that I drew wasn't really a square in space. In order to fit a circle into a plane like that, it kind of has to be a square. So that's why that little cylinder I drew is sort of, it's a little bit lopsided, not quite right. But I'll show you how to do it in one-point perspective, and then we'll go over how to do it in two-point, and we'll get it right. But for now, it looks okay. And I just saw these little triangles that got left over from that big X that I drew, and I decided to render them. And then and now for the next part, I'm thinking about chopping the corner off of this one box and just showing how easy it is. And this last part was an attempt to draw this little section that I carved out to place it somewhere else in the drawing. And then I don't know what happened to it. It got cut off. But anyway, I was just trying to have fun.